Marciana Fernandez Balon. Welcome back to Recambia News. Asian peoples at ASEAN 2025, Indigenous Peoples' Right. Asian Peoples 2025, which held from 24 to 25 May 2025 at Wisma MCA Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. As the Asian event is in conjunction with the ASEAN 2025 Summit, together let's be the voice of the Asian community to reflect, reimagine, reclaim, and reform the Southeast Asia region future, our Asian peoples at the core. Final program agenda 24 until 25 May 2025. This outlines the full 2-day schedule, including keynote sessions, thematic classes, panel discussion, workshops, and networking opportunities. In this opportunity, civic society organizations from Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Myanmar as speakers on panel dialogue to describe and reflected thematic cluster on the indigenous people's right to address on recognizing IPS rights, identity, land, and FPIC in Asian as well as guardians of the earth, indigenous knowledge, and nature conservation during 2 days.
Right now, our current challenges are the cascading dam that has been proposed by our current premier. We are faced with this issue since last year. He has proposed these cascading dams which might affect or will affect the biodiversity and the rivers in our areas. The thing that motivated me the most to fight for my rights as an Indigenous person is because I am an Indigenous person. I value my heritage, I value my culture, I value the ecosystem that is around me. Yeah, that's why. That's the reason why I am fighting for my rights. The solution to this issue is for them to actually involve us in decision making, to make our involvement meaningful. As Indigenous people, we have to be in these spaces to create, for them to create spaces for us to have conversations and implement our rights and our beliefs into the systems that they want to create. My belief on how we can implement or how these policymakers are able to create opportunities for Indigenous people to be in spaces of decision making and implement meaningful policies that involve us as Indigenous people.
So with the presence of Indigenous peoples here, what we want or demand for is we want your recognition to the Indigenous peoples, and also what also we have heard, we want the inclusion as themes for the ASEAN this year is in inclusivity and sustainability. So meaning to say we want a meaningful participation, not just bringing Indigenous people as a quorum, but also include them in the decision making. But also more important is we also advocating for direct access funding to Indigenous peoples and their organization so that we can work together and shape this world for the future benefit, not only for the Indigenous peoples, but for whole society. As we have always said, if you want to drink clean water, then we need to protect our forests, our territories together. So what we also heard, the poem from our current indigenous people from Thailand, they said, we all wanted to have clean access of water. So if you want to access the clean water, definitely we have our own responsibility to protect our own territories. So this is what is very important for us. We wanted to work together for all of you, different stakeholders, but we need genuine and meaningful collaboration. So finally, because ASEAN wanted to achieve ASEAN Declaration on a Safe, Clean, and Health Sustainable Environment, our demand for this is one is we wanted you to recognize Indigenous peoples, meaning to say we need to include indigenous peoples itself in the declaration part. And our terms is indigenous peoples. And this is enshrined in the UNRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples. I think all member states in ASEAN have voted for this. That means we need also the protection for our indigenous people, environmental human rights defenders, including indigenous women, as they are forefront of this climate change. And the third one is we want also to promote our cultural heritage, also support the capacity building to the indigenous peoples. So this is really our hope. Hopefully, we wanted to see the change of the Malaysia leadership as an ASEAN chairmanship this year. So we can work together. I think indigenous people is part of the solution. We can build our planet together.
We have 158 indigenous people's lawyer and also law expert. My task is not only as an indigenous people's lawyer, but also as an emergency response and international advocacy divisions. In Indonesia, actually, the challenges facing by indigenous peoples, they're still facing lack of recognitions, lack of protections, and also facing a lot of torture. They lost their customary land because investment at the industry extractive, for example, like nickel mining, gold mining, coal minings, geothermal power plant, palm oil plantations, and also national strategic project in the name of climate mitigations. My motivation is because I'm also indigenous peoples, and that's my calling to work with our brother and sister indigenous peoples through Indonesia, and also as a human for humanity. Honestly, we are still struggle to have our rights at the, but we hope in the future all of our governments, our political parties, our policy making persons will recognize us and respect us as indigenous peoples entities, following free prior informed consent under United Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights. We are success, but not really successfully. For the policy making, for example, around 200 local regulations about indigenous people's right to protect and recognize, and also forest certification from Minister of Forest at that time. But for the high-level regulations like Environmental Act or what we call we still struggle for our indigenous people's bill. We still fight for until now and still going on. We created and submitted our draft since 2011, but until now we still fight for our indigenous people's bill. For our governments, please, if you decided to create any policy or regulation or law who impacted to Indonesian people, including indigenous peoples, invite us, indigenous peoples, effectively and fully involve and respect our rights.
In the concluded recommendations are to recognize the IPS right, respect indigenous people's ritual knowledge and wisdom, bottom-up federal democracy for indigenous peoples, and recognize the customary of IPS. Reported by Recambia team. That's all for today. A big thank you from Recambia team, and we look forward to seeing you in the next edition.